There are two kinds of people in every room: the ones who react and the ones who win. The ones who react tell you everything about themselves in the first 5 seconds: what scares them, what they need, what they'll do to get it. The ones who win say almost nothing. They watch, they wait, and by the time the room figures out what happened, it's already over. Niccolò Machiavelli spent his life studying the second kind of person, not because he admired them, because he was terrified of what happens when you don't understand them, and end up working for one, married to one, or negotiating against one without knowing it. He was a diplomat before he was a writer. He watched popes, kings, and mercenary captains outmaneuver each other for a living, and he took notes on the ones who survived. What he found was uncomfortable, and it's still uncomfortable today. The people who win are rarely the smartest people in the room. They're the most disciplined about 3 things: never react, never explain, just win. Those aren't 3 separate ideas, they're one operating system, and by the end of this video, you'll be able to spot it in your boss, your ex, your rival, and if you're honest with yourself, in the gap between who you are and who you could be. This is Cold Readings. If you're new here, we cover the psychology of power, influence, and the people who are good enough at both that you never notice them doing it. Today we're going straight to the source. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513, officially as a survival manual for a Florentine ruler he was hoping to win favor with. Unofficially, it's the most honest book ever written about how power actually moves through a room. Stripped of the moral commentary everyone else was too polite to leave out. Most people who've heard of Machiavelli know one word: Machiavellian. They use it as an insult, shorthand for scheming, for cruelty, for someone who can't be trusted. That's a mistake, and it's the mistake this video is going to correct. Because the people using his principles against you don't think of themselves as villains. They think of themselves as effective. And the only way to stop mistaking their effectiveness for evil or their evil for effectiveness is to understand the mechanics underneath it. The book itself has a strange history. It was banned by the Catholic Church for over 200 years. Enemies of the Medici family used it as proof of their corruption. Supporters used the exact same pages as a practical instruction manual. Both readings can't be right. And the reason the argument never resolved is that Machiavelli wasn't writing a moral philosophy, he was writing an operations manual. Morality was never the point, function was. We're going to break this down into 3 rules. Each one sounds simple, none of them are easy, and each one is being used on you right now by someone, whether you've clocked it or not. Machiavelli's first, quietest rule is this: the moment you react, you hand over information. Not just information about how you feel, information about how you can be controlled. Think about what a reaction actually is. It's involuntary. It's the one moment where the mask drops and the machinery underneath is visible. What you value, what you fear losing, where your line is. Every negotiator, every manipulator, every skilled leader knows this instinctively. Don't watch what someone says. Watch what makes them flinch. Machiavelli's Florence was a city of assassinations, shifting alliances and public executions of anyone who miscalculated. In that environment, a visible reaction wasn't just embarrassing, it was often fatal because it told your enemies exactly where to push next. He wasn't writing self-help. He was writing a survival manual for people who could not afford to be read. There's a passage in The Prince where he praises Cesare Borgia, not for his cruelty, which Machiavelli is often wrongly remembered for endorsing, but for his patience. Borgia would absorb an insult, a betrayal, even an assassination attempt, and give no visible sign of it for weeks, sometimes months, until he'd chosen the exact moment and method of his response. The delay wasn't weakness, it was the entire strategy. Why this still runs the world: you don't live in Renaissance Florence. But the mechanism hasn't changed because the mechanism was never about politics. It's about information asymmetry. Whoever reveals less controls more of the exchange. That's true in a boardroom, a group chat, a breakup conversation, and a salary negotiation. Here's the version you've actually lived through. Someone says something designed to get a rise out of you. A backhanded comment in a meeting, a dig disguised as a joke, an accusation that isn't quite true but is close enough to sting. If you react, if your voice rises, if you over-explain, If you visibly deflate, you've just told everyone in the room 3 things. That comment landed, you don't have a comfortable answer, and you can be provoked on command. Congratulations, you just became a lever someone else can pull whenever they want a specific outcome from you. The person who doesn't react isn't necessarily calmer inside. They've just learned that the space between stimulus and response is the only piece of real estate they fully control. And they are not giving it away for free. Everything else in a negotiation, a conflict, or a power struggle can be taken from you. That half-second of composure cannot, unless you hand it over yourself. A case study in the Wild: watch any high-stakes negotiation footage, hostage negotiators, courtroom cross-examinations, even a well-run performance review, and you'll notice the same pattern. The person with more leverage tends to speak slower, pause longer, and ask more questions than they answer. The person with less leverage fills silence. They overtalk. They negotiate against themselves by adding concessions nobody asked for just to escape the discomfort of a quiet room. That discomfort is the entire lever. Silence feels like losing to people who haven't trained themselves out of that instinct. To someone who has, silence is just the most expensive real estate in the conversation, and they're happy to let you overpay for it. This is why the calmest person in a heated meeting so often ends up with the outcome they wanted, even when their argument wasn't the strongest one on the table. Not because composure is persuasive on its own, but because everyone else is busy reacting, overcommitting, and negotiating against themselves, while the composed person is simply waiting for the moment the room talks itself into the answer that was already the right one. The cost people don't talk about, this is where most content on composure stops, and it's where it starts lying to you. Because the honest answer is that never reacting has a cost. Suppress every flinch for long enough, and you're not composed, you're numb. Machiavelli himself wasn't advocating for a personality transplant. He was advocating for a delay, a half-second or a half-day between what you feel and what you show. There's a difference between composure and disconnection, and it matters more than most advice on this topic admits. Composure means you still feel the sting, the anger, the hurt. You've simply decided not to let it dictate your next move in real time. Disconnection means you've stopped feeling it at all. And that's not power, that's a cost you'll pay later, usually in a relationship where you needed to be present and weren't. That's the actual skill, not the absence of reaction, the deliberate placement of it. You choose when the reaction happens, in what form and in front of whom. That's not suppression, that's authorship. How to apply it this week. Next time something lands, a comment, a slight, a piece of bad news delivered with a smirk, do the same 3 things every time. Pause for 1 full breath before you speak. Ask a question instead of making a statement. Say more about that does more damage to a bad faith comment than any comeback you could improvise. And decide afterward, on your own schedule, whether this earns a reaction at all. Most things don't. Do that consistently, and something interesting happens. People stop testing you, not because you've won an argument, because you've stopped being a productive place to provoke. Where this fails, it's worth naming where this principle breaks, because a channel that only tells you the upside of a framework isn't being honest with you. Never reacting fails the moment it becomes a performance for an audience that isn't there. The version of composure that exists purely so other people notice how composed you are. That's not withholding information anymore. That's advertising your restraint, which defeats the entire purpose. The people Machiavelli was describing weren't calm because they wanted credit for being calm. They were calm because reacting was expensive, and they knew it. It also fails inside relationships that are supposed to run on vulnerability rather than leverage. A negotiation benefits from unreadability. A marriage, a close friendship, a genuine partnership does not. If you bring boardroom composure into a conversation where someone needs you to actually be affected by what they're telling you, you're not protecting information anymore. You're withholding intimacy, and the other person will feel that, even if they can't name it. This rule belongs in rooms where leverage is being contested. It does not belong in every room you walk into. The second rule is the one people misunderstand the most, because on the surface it sounds like arrogance. It isn't. Never explain doesn't mean never communicate. It means stop justifying decisions to people who didn't need to be part of making them. Machiavelli was blunt about this in a way that still makes people uncomfortable 500 years later. He observed that a ruler who explains every decision hands their opponents a roadmap, not just of what was decided, but of the reasoning, the hesitations, the trade-offs that were weighed and rejected. Every justification is a document your rivals can use against you later. "Here's why I chose you over him" becomes ammunition the moment the relationship sours. He wrote about this specifically in the context of appointing ministers and advisors. A prince who announces his reasoning for every appointment, he argued, teaches every rejected candidate exactly what to imitate and exactly what to resent. Silence about the reasoning didn't just protect the decision, it protected the decision-maker from becoming a target for everyone the decision disappointed. The over-explaining trap. Watch how this shows up in your own life. Someone over-explains a decision, why they didn't reply for 2 days, why they chose one option over another, why they need to leave the party early, and the explanation is almost always longer than the situation required. That length is the tell. People over-explain when they feel they need permission for something they've already decided. The explanation isn't information, it's an apology wearing a longer coat. Here's the uncomfortable part. Over-explaining doesn't reduce conflict, it usually manufactures it, because a long explanation gives the other person more surface area to attack. Every sentence is a new thread they can pull. You said it was because of X, but earlier you said Y. Congratulations, you've just been cross-examined over a decision that required zero justification in the first place. This shows up constantly at work. Someone declines an invitation to a project with 4 sentences of justification instead of 1. Somewhere around sentence 3, a colleague finds the inconsistency, the soft spot, the thing that doesn't quite add up. And now the conversation isn't about the original decision anymore. It's about defending the explanation. The decision was fine. The explanation is what got you into trouble. What withholding actually looks like. This is not about becoming cold or unaccountable. Machiavelli's ruler still explained things to people who had actual standing in the decision, and only to the degree the decision affected them. The rule isn't secrecy for its own sake, it's proportionality. Explain to people who are owed an explanation. Stop performing justification for people who are simply owed a decision. Think about the most respected person you know, a mentor, a boss, someone whose opinion actually shifts your behavior. Odds are they don't narrate every choice they make. When they say no once, cleanly, and they don't relitigate it under pressure. That isn't coldness. It's the absence of a specific kind of weakness. The need to be understood by everyone, all the time, before you're allowed to act. Compare that to the manager who explains every decision to the entire team, every time, in exhaustive detail. It reads as transparency at first. 6 months in, it usually reads as something else. A person who needs the team's approval to feel confident in their own calls. Authority quietly drains out of a room every time it over-explains itself, whether the explanation is well-intentioned or not. Why withholding reads as strength. Silence isn't the absence of an answer, it's a decision not to give you one, and the people who understand this instinctively make everyone around them slightly more careful, slightly more respectful, and slightly less inclined to test the boundary twice. That's not manipulation. That's what happens naturally when information stops leaking out of you by default. This week, notice how many times you explain something nobody actually asked you to justify. A schedule choice, a preference, a no. Each time, ask one question before you open your mouth. Does this person have standing in this decision, or are you just uncomfortable with the silence? Most of the time, it's the silence you're managing, not the relationship version. This one shows up in personal relationships in a slightly different costume. You turn down a plan, and instead of leaving it there, you keep adding reasons. You're tired, and also you have an early morning, and also you've been meaning to have a quiet weekend, and also. None of those reasons were requested. They were offered preemptively to head off a disappointment that might not have even been coming. The person on the other end usually isn't auditing your reasons. They're noticing that you didn't feel safe enough to just say no. Compare that to someone who says, "I can't make it, but I'd love to see you next week," and stops there. It reads as more confident, not less caring. because the warmth is in the second half of the sentence and the first half didn't need defending. Machiavelli's version of this, 500 years earlier, was, "The decision is yours to make once. Don't let it become something you have to keep remaking every time someone frowns at it." The third rule is the one Machiavelli is most infamous for, and the one most badly misquoted. People shorten it to "the ends justify the means," as if he were handing out a permission slip for cruelty. That's not what the text says, and it's not what made the prince dangerous enough to get banned by the church for 2 centuries. What Machiavelli actually argued is narrower and honestly harder to sit with. A ruler is judged by outcomes, not intentions. And a ruler who prioritizes being liked over being effective will eventually lose the ability to protect the very people whose approval they were chasing. Kindness that isn't backed by competence isn't kindness. It's a liability wearing a nice outfit. He uses the metaphor of a doctor treating a disease early versus late. A skilled physician, he says, recognizes the illness while it's still small and easy to treat. But that's precisely the point at which it's hardest to see, so most rulers wait until the disease is obvious and, by then, incurable. Being liked in the moment, avoiding the hard, early, unpopular decision, is exactly how you guarantee the catastrophic, unpopular decision later. Approval seeking as a hidden cost center. Translate that into your life and it gets uncomfortable fast. How much of what you do in a given week is optimized for being liked in the room, rather than for the outcome you actually need? The meeting where you agreed with a plan you didn't believe in because disagreeing felt confrontational. The project you took on that wasn't yours to take because saying no felt selfish. The friend you keep making excuses for because holding the boundary would make you the bad guy for an afternoon. Each of those is a small transaction where you traded a real outcome for a temporary feeling of being well regarded. Machiavelli's bet, and it's a bet the data on effective leadership keeps confirming 500 years later, is that this trade is almost always a bad one. Approval is liquid. It evaporates the moment you're inconvenient. Results compound. There's a specific pattern worth naming here because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The person who says yes to avoid a moment of conflict is usually borrowing that comfort against a much larger conflict later. The team member who never pushes back on an unreasonable deadline isn't avoiding conflict. They're scheduling it for 3 weeks from now, when the deadline is missed and the explanation is due instead of the disagreement. The same pattern runs underneath most burnout, if you trace it back far enough. It rarely starts with one catastrophic overcommitment. It starts with a long series of small, individually reasonable-sounding yeses, each one chosen because the no in that specific moment felt disproportionately costly. Machiavelli would have recognized the shape of it immediately, even outside a political context. A ruler who says yes to every faction to keep the peace ends up governing nothing because he spent his authority buying goodwill in installments he can't get back. Winning without becoming cruel. Here's where this channel splits from the caricature version of this idea. Just win is not a license to burn people to get there. Machiavelli himself noted that a ruler who relies purely on fear and cruelty eventually gets overthrown by the people he terrorized because fear without any goodwill is unstable. The actual formula is more precise. Be effective first, likable second, and never confuse the two, and never sacrifice the first to protect the second. That means you can be warm, you can be generous, you can be the person people genuinely enjoy being around. But none of that is allowed to override the decision that actually needs to be made. The moment your kindness becomes a mechanism for avoiding a hard call, it stopped being a virtue and started being a vulnerability. And the people around you, consciously or not, will find it and use it. Machiavelli's own preferred balance was blunt. Better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both, but the goal was never fear for its own sake. Fear was simply more reliable than love, because love depends on the other person's goodwill, and goodwill is the one variable you never fully control. Being respected for your competence, on the other hand, depends only on you. What this looks like in practice. Next time you're weighing a decision and you notice the phrase, "But what will they think?" creeping in before you've even asked, "Will this actually work?" Stop and reorder the questions. Ask what produces the outcome you actually need. Then, separately, ask how to deliver that outcome with as much warmth and respect as the situation allows. Warmth is the delivery mechanism. It was never supposed to be the decision-making criteria. The historical proof: Machiavelli didn't have to invent an example to make this point. He had one sitting in recent memory. Cesare Borgia was handed a territory, Romagna, that had been run so loosely for so long that it was lawless, violent, and functionally ungovernable. Borgia installed a ruthlessly efficient governor, Ramiro de Orco, who restored order fast and brutally. The region stabilized. The population for the first time in years was safe. Then Borgia had Ramiro publicly executed and left the body on display in the town square. Machiavelli's read on this wasn't horror, it was admiration for the calculation. Borgia let someone else absorb the resentment that came with restoring order, then distanced himself from the cruelty the moment it had done its job, converting the population's fear of Ramiro into gratitude toward himself. Effective first, the optics were managed second, and only after the outcome was already secured. You don't need a body in a town square to learn the lesson. The lesson is the sequencing: outcome, then optics. Not optics instead of outcome, and not optics as a substitute for ever producing one. Put the three rules next to each other, and you can see they're not really three rules. They're one discipline viewed from three angles. Never react protects your information. Never explain protects your position. Just win protects your outcomes. Take anyone away and the other two start to crumble. React to everything, and your silence stops meaning anything, because people know you'll eventually crack. Explain everything, and your wins stop looking like decisions and start looking like negotiations everyone gets a vote in. Chase approval over outcomes, and you'll find yourself reacting and explaining constantly because you've made your legitimacy dependent on other people's comfort. This is why Machiavelli has survived 5 centuries of being condemned, banned, and misquoted. He wasn't describing a moral position, he was describing a mechanism. And mechanisms don't care whether you approve of them. They just keep working in every boardroom, every relationship, every negotiation, whether or not anyone in the room has read the book. The people who unsettle you, the ones who seem unreadable, unbothered, quietly in control of every room they walk into, are not operating on instinct. They are operating on a system. And now you know what it is. You might be sitting with an objection right now, and it's worth answering directly instead of pretending it doesn't come up. Doesn't this just describe how to become cold, calculating, and a little bit unbearable to be around? Only if you apply all 3 rules to every relationship in your life, all the time, with no discrimination between a negotiation and a dinner with people who love you. Machiavelli was writing for a ruler managing rivals who wanted him dead. Most of your week isn't that. The skill isn't running this system constantly. It's recognizing exactly which rooms actually require it and having it available for the ones that do. This is the first video in a series on power and influence. We'll come back to Machiavelli twice more this year, including a video on the art of letting people underestimate you, which is the exact inverse of everything we just covered. If this way of looking at power is new to you, this channel is going to spend the next 6 months building out the full picture. Stoicism, Jung, Nietzsche, and the psychology underneath all of it. Subscribe if you want the next piece. Never react, never explain, just win. Not because it's comfortable, because it's accurate.